Okay, so this is part 2. We're looking now at planning. Just to summarize, lesson part 1, I didn't want to do it in part 1 because the lecture was already long enough for YouTube. Um, so what we have said was that the purpose of standard English is to access broader audience. Point B, we have different dialects and they are fine, and you should make children actually know about it, because they will not only listen to people with accents like mine, but they will listen to English which is spoken to Papua New Guinea. I mean, you might have students from different regions of the world where English is actually more or less first language, like say in India, but people have a particular accent. So it's very important that you actually do make students aware that the world is bigger than they thought, and that gives children a bit of fun, bit of relaxation, but at the same time it's quite interesting. And in order to actually make some sense in this world, which speaks in every color possible of the language, we use the whole spectrum of different ways of pronouncing things. Standard English helps us to communicate in a more coherent way. Communication devices, there are many communication devices that we could use. Now, they will depend on the purpose. So even in spoken language, we will be using different devices in order to achieve different communicative purpose. Now, it's very important for children to actually learn that writing allows us to store information for future retrieval, whether it is to retell the story or some other reasons. But spoken language and also development of spoken skills is also important, because we do use spoken language actually to reach people in a more immediate way. And even now, this YouTube video where I actually talk to you, you might say, will go to people in Australia and around Australia. That is true. But I'm talking about it because actually spoken language fulfills other functions than writing does. It allows us to actually reach each other in a more immediate, in a more resonating way, if we have the right devices. So there is rhetoric, a study of rhetoric, where people actually learn how to do it, how to talk to people, and how to resonate with people, and how to actually use language, oral language, in order to actually get things understood the way they actually intended them to be understood. So this is a summary. Purpose, broader audience, form, differences, but we want actually to communicate, so we need some sort of shared device. And many devices, the devices will differ in their specifics depending on the purpose. And we need to have an oral language and we need to have a control over our oral language so that we can actually link up with people in a more immediate way. Now, the focus of this planning part of this lecture. Valerie, I have looked at Valerie, I can't remember Valerie's surname, but in activity 1 of this unit, she wrote the following words, that she identifies the following foci of her teaching, which is to understand the purpose of a written exercise, for example, identify adequate amount of information that should go in, and also help organize this information. This is exactly what we're actually doing in our assignment 1 and assignment 2 when planning a unit of work. We want children to actually understand why they are actually going about all these learning activities, which means focusing them on, I call it assignment because that's, or assessment task, because that's just a formal language, but basically focusing them on a project. Let's build a castle. Let's in a sand pit, right? That's the kind of metaphor I used. So we want them to actually know why they do it and for whom. We want them to actually identify the relevant information that goes in. We want them to identify, not we as teachers, yes, we identify what would be of value, but we then not preach it to them. We create conditions so that they can relate what's what tools are out there to the purpose of their project. And also we create tools so that students do not just identify information in terms of language, but also how to actually work with that language to organize information in an appropriate way. So she was right. Valerie is absolutely on the money. The thing is that this is just a surface level. We need to now actually explore how to actually do this in terms of the detail of teaching. And that's the purpose of assignment 2, and also it was the purpose of assignment 1. Now, in your module 3, you are given this Jim Cummins grid, and he basically makes here the argument that the difference between well-skilled user of a language, let's say here English, and less skilled user of a language is that a less skilled user requires a lot of information to process. Now I want you to actually think about it abstractly. A non-skilled user requires a lot of support, contextual support, to actually get not necessarily things right, but to a degree things right. So if a non-skilled user requires a lot of contextual support in order to get something right or all things right, what is it that you are obliged to do as a teacher? Right? It is to produce a lot of contextual support so that they can actually make sense out of the requirements of their project and information about the context that they evaluate, and they can actually creatively engage in order to actually complete the project, right? So it's very simple. Cummins is right. I don't think that Cummins invented it. I mean, it's quite a known grid, but I'm glad it is here in your module. So the idea is now, and actually it might not necessarily be reflected very well in this graph, but the idea is now for us as teachers to support our students and provide them with a lot of contextual support, because that's exactly the marker of someone who is not a skilled language user, right? Removing a lot of contextual support will actually not support them in learning English. Now, I am not going to address the activities he suggests here, because it's irrelevant in a sense, because they are just suggestions. What I want us to do is not have suggestions in our units of work. I want us to actually extrapolate or identify what should go in as a support, and do that in a theoretically coherent way, because identifying activities, I will do this, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do this, and by then I've just run out of ideas, so maybe we'll just finish it here, right? We can't teach like that. We have to know what we're doing, and we have to actually provide resources for creating enough of contextual support for our students. And now you remember that students, that language shapes thought. So here's another sort of obstacle here, where you think it should be enough of support. If you provide this and that, it may not be. That's why I say that rich contextual support is the key. Not just we demonstrated, we showed it, we've modeled this. I think people who talk about modeling, either they don't necessarily mean what you might mean, because modeling is not bad in itself, but people don't see things the same way as other people do. What you think you showed is not necessarily what the other person saw. So I am not saying modeling is wrong, but we need to provide more than that, a lot of contextual support. And then what happens students then move through their learning process whereby it's not that they don't need contextual support anymore, as might be implied in this graph. They just need a different support, right? The more you can handle, the more you can handle. You see what I'm saying? The more you have under control, then the more can be put on your plate, because you have some things already well organized. So it's not that children don't need a lot of, or students as they progress, they don't need a lot of contextual support. That support will change. So with primaries or early childhood students who don't speak English or don't speak standard English, you will be doing a lot of breaking down of things to the point of rhythm and intonation, all this stuff. But with higher level students, when they actually have certain things in place, you might be actually focusing on more detailed extrapolation of the ways in which people do things between different cultures. You might actually use in a more complex way, in a richer way, their experiences and experiences of all students from different countries and from different cultures. So yes, my point really is it's not from a lot to zero, it's from a lot to a lot, it's just that a lot will change. So what is it that I wrote here? Now this is a very important concept that I'm not sure whether it's given to you in other units. I think it is, but I think it kind of gets lost. So what we want our children, so for example, when I came to Australia myself, I had my Polish history in me. I was a product of a Polish history, whatever that may mean. I also spoke German already in a native way, so in a sense I was also socialized to particular cultural practices of German, but I didn't have English history, or very little of it, right? I had to acquire my history, not the sort of ways of being in Australia which are shared by everyone. That they are shared. It is an illusion that they are shared, but let's call it this way. But even if they are shared, each of them is elicited through individual use. So I had to learn my own take, my own way. I had to acquire my own history in English. So that's what it means to teach now, to also support students in actually moving from a lot of contextual support to maybe a lot but of different, more sophisticated contextual support. What students are learning is not necessarily English in that way. What they are actually doing is they are acquiring their own history in English. Their own history. That history is always idiosyncratic. That's why if you have 25 students in your class and they all speak English as their native language, none of them is the same. None of them looks at things the same way. None of them even speaks English the same way. Each of them has their own history. That history concept is critical in education. Now, some of you will be having lectures who will talk about habitus. And that's the sort of concept that is used. It comes from French sociology. It's used to actually talk about that sort of historical foundation of each of and every human being, and also institutions as well. But I'm not going to go there at this very moment today. So we are all walking histories, co-constructed in a society with others, but still having our own individual accents. So by now you pretty much get an idea about how complex all of this is. This is individual histories, and then we had the idea of this rich contextual support. So where is it all going? Now I had an exchange with one of our students on the discussion board, which was wonderful. And I need to actually, before I talk about planning, I want to connect all these concepts like the histories or the idea of needing a lot of contextual support, because there's so much that we're dealing with when actually in an education environment. Now, we were talking about understanding what words mean, and I want to actually start here first before we actually go into the practice of teaching, because we need to actually know what we're doing. So I have given you again in lecture 1 or in module 1 access to a YouTube video clip where this professor, who is a specialist on education and brain, or literacy and brain, she's not saying that when you say a word, maybe I don't have here a text, let's call it a word. When you pronounce a word, what happens in the brain, she says. So she was, of course, naughty, and she made people say P. And and now what she actually said is, any word you pronounce, and this is the question I have to our students, what do you think happens at the brain level? And that's very important, because you're not dealing just with children or students, no matter what their age. You're actually a part of the environment, and most probably critical part, who shapes their brains, right? You actually are. If you have them for 8 hours a day, you tell me who's most responsible for shaping their brains. When they go home, they just do homework, which is more of you, and play with parents, then sleep. You are the one who has them at the hours that are most awake and active. Okay? So when you pronounce a word, if word had a meaning, then just one light would turn on itself in the brain. This means this. But it doesn't. It doesn't, and just as well. Just as well. What happens if you say a word, a lot of places light up in the brain. A lot. Not just one. Why do you think it is the case? If a word had a meaning, then all we would have to do is to, this means that. Now, if you actually, one day, once you start actually being involved increasingly more professionally in your job, you'll be going beyond the education. You'll be listening to quantum physics. You'll be listening to different theories of how the world is. And you'll see that the idea of world being digital, this means that, is actually, we barely can argue that the world exists in reality. So one-to-one existence, it's actually even harder to argue. But the brain, basically, you say a word and it lights up all around the place. Why is that? Well, I'll show you why I think it is. Well, she explains it to us, but I'll show you how I actually translate it into our model of reading. Well, if we have a sentence of any kind, let's create a sentence like, the cat is brown. That is hardly ever heard, but it is registered, right? So things lighten up somewhere here. And they lighten up by preparing a child or a person for diverse options that will happen after the, right? And it could be anything, but it could be anything other than nothing that can, right? So certain things will light up, but they will be the ones that can come after the in a particular situation, and the ones that can't will not light up. And that's very interesting, isn't it? So then from this sort of thing, then the brain goes to the next mode, to the next sort of sets of lights, so to speak. The cat. Okay, so the brain is ready. Activated lots of neurons. What can come with the cat? From my knowledge and from the knowledge of the context, right? So there's a lot of lights on, and then the cat is, okay, some of the lights get switched off, new ones get turned on. You see, that's why I did this, because some lights get turned on, and then as you actually move on through comprehension, the lights you didn't need, they get turned off, new ones get turned on, and then the lights you didn't have, as you progress through reading or through listening, the lights that the next word or the next sort of phrase, however the brain catches it and does it, what actually happens at the level of a brain, new lights get turned off, and the lights that were not needed get turned off, right? And that's what happens. What we have is a brain supports us in narrowing down our understanding of the sentence as we go through it, or narrowing. So it supports us with these slides in narrowing down, but we couldn't process information this easily and this fast if we didn't have all of that, like all of these lights on, that the brain selected as potentially relevant at this first level of a sentence, the second, third, fourth, right? So the brain is a pretty good friend of ours, lights up all of this stuff, and because all of them are ready, we can make our guesses faster. And that's very interesting. So then we have our final selection of what probably the meaning is. We then react on it, and then we get a response. And then we go through the process yet again, right? So that's what I wanted to say. The meaning, words don't have meaning. What happens is it's a linguistic representation of how the concept of meaning actually operates. It's a linguistic representation, wonderful as a shortcut, but not as wonderful when you apply it to life. I'm not sure if many of you have heard that description, which says the map is not a territory, right? But this applies very much here. The map is a drawing. The territory, you go to on the map it looks good. You go to the territory and it's just mud and forest and it's uninhabitable. So as you know, on the map it didn't look anything like that. So now it's very important that we understand this concept, which is that the meaning construction is not an outcome of word plus word equals final thing. We can describe it as such, but at the neurological level, this does not happen. And as I'll just tell you also why not only doesn't happen, because I just showed you how complicated the brain is in selecting and activating things and eliminating things, but if it did happen that this word plus this word equals this meaning, then we would say that how we actually work with meaning has nothing to do with us as being historical creatures, the creatures of our past. We would then say that meaning is in words, not in our histories. We would deny everything that since the 1960s has been the key of research in critical pedagogy, in critical theory, in sociology, anthropology. We have actually done a lot of stuff in a lot of disciplines for us to understand that people are not robots and words are not dictionary based, that basically each of us is their own universe. And that's why you then hear from people in education the concept of meaning negotiation. Why there is a need for negotiation when all you have to do is to add 2 and 2 and get 4? Right? So the idea of matching words that things will pop out is not as simple as often it is taken to be. So when we will be supporting students in actually going about their projects and developing understandings about what is involved, we don't want them to actually understand that this you put here because it gives you this outcome. What we want students to do is to, with the help of our support, to create their own history, their own idiosyncratic history in English. That is so important. So look at this. We're no longer teaching them English. We're actually supporting them to develop history in English. This is why this unit is so important for us, because we need to see that we're working with real people who actually are not in English in order to pass our assignments, to give us expected responses. What we want from what our role is to support their development of their own history, their own identity, their own place, their own idiosyncratic place in our English world or Australian world. And each of us has this place, each and every one. And just as well, each of us had different experiences, therefore we use different tools in different ways for whatever purposes we do, and that's what makes our world colorful and beautiful. So we're not teaching them anything. What we're doing is supporting their development, the development of their history in English. That's why all these contextual supports that you will create for students need to be rich. So because history is a complex and big thing to develop, and by removing access to this rich support, we're not supporting them. They become entrenched in one way of being, and they become either resentful to the practices required by school, or they will learn English but somewhere else, somehow else, despite of our teaching. So now you can see why I'm saying that any form of teaching, and I know I'm fully aware that some of you were repeating my words and repeating words which are in textbooks, which on the surface level they say that we build on our previous knowledge. But that doesn't mean that N is built on G and I is built on N and N is built on I and so on. It doesn't mean creating towers. This activity will make children remember this. This activity will make children remember this. And at the end of the day, they will be able to do I. It doesn't work like this. Sooner or later, they go into an overload. And that's why that concept of overload is very important. That's why we had this graph here by Jim Cummings. Remember? The graph was actually saying to us that unless we give them in the A square of this graph, unless we give them enough of contextual support, they are in an overload. They can't process. But because they're children, because they're small, they're little geniuses, what will happen is they will remember G, they will remember N, they will remember I, but sooner or later the tower is gonna break. So what we have to do is to remember the following. The brain activates, eliminates, and activates new connections, and then eliminates, and then activates again and eliminates. So meaning is actually an outcome of this complicated process of activating and eliminating, and all of that is actually constructed in accordance to one's history. Very, very important. So that's what I want us to remember, is this sort of historically determined and historically informed process of knowledge or meaning construction. It's not building a tower. So where will you be in an academic year? Somewhere here on top? Where would you be? It doesn't work like this. What we do, we develop increasingly connected networks, right? Through this, activities or at uni or activities at work or activities in life probe us to explore what connects with what and how. And we develop increasingly connected networks that provide support for us when actually in life situations. In a model like this one, when we actually take account of students' history, therefore differences, we actually will be not only supporting learning but also creativity, because we actually are acting in respect to children's differences. Here, there's only reproduction. And we treat students as if they had no history. So we do not allow for differences. We just want them to march according to our drum. So at the end of the day, what I'm aiming for is that our support that we provide for our students through our unit of work will actually enable, through compare and contrast and evaluate, will provide students with different tools so that they can negotiate in their own heads the relevance of different kinds of information for their project. This is very important, because that negotiation, just like I mentioned the concept of dialogue or interaction in my previous lecture, that concept of negotiation first has to happen in your own head. Well, it always happens only in your own head, but let's be a little bit more practical here and just say as students are engaged in a particular project, they need to evaluate what goes in. They will be evaluating this in accordance to their own history. So in order for their project in order not to feel overloaded, what we need to do is to create conditions for students whereby this evaluation can be based on a rich basis, can be constructed by students on a rich basis, so that their history is involved as opposed to disregarded. Right? Just we don't do replace your whatever you know now with our own little thing, you know. What we need to do is actually put in place sufficiently rich activities for the compare and contrast to be so supportive that it doesn't discriminate against students' own background. It engages the differences they bring in because it's so rich. They can compare and contrast and make informed decisions regarding how they will go about their project. And that's absolutely critical. And I would like to see it repeated in your assignments if possible. So now, if we see this so complicated, the process of actually supporting learning is so complicated, right? We don't disregard students' history. Now, many of you have written in the assignment 1 that you have mentioned the concept of explicit teaching, right? Now, this means different things for different people. That's why you can't just whitewash an assignment and say, I'll do explicit teaching, because then you get a response from me, and I will say it's explicit to whom? I've been explicitly explaining exploratory model now for 7 weeks, and only a handful or 2 handfuls or 3 handfuls of our students understand it, right? So what happens is we need to engage students in a form of learning that what we call explicit teaching is to actually create understandings in students that are explicit to them. Typically what happens is explicit teaching is misunderstood or hijacked by rednecks in current affairs. And they say, well, we'll just teach them grammar, vocabulary, and you know that stuff, how to talk. We just teach them how to talk, they can't talk. Because the people who are rednecks on current affairs, they have no idea what goes into play in a text. So grammar and vocabulary become really the master points, right? Because that's what they remember from school, if they went to school at all. And then the rest they cover how to talk, how the way we talk, they have to talk how we talk, right? So that's lovely. It's just lovely, but it doesn't work. So what we need to do now, as I said before, we are intellectuals. Teachers are intellectuals. We need to ask ourselves, what is an explanation? Anything that explains, right? Anything that has an outcome, but that explained to me. So ultimately, explicit teaching has to actually produce something that explains something to the students, not what you thought was explanatory. So again, as I said before, the idea is about actually creating conditions that engage students' history, which means you can only engage students' individual histories when you produce rich in context information, rich. So that's why I said, be clear what you expect. What are the items in your assessment that you actually that create the assessment task, then break it down into elements and break those also into sub-elements, and then devise your teaching strategies, your resources, your sub-activities in order to actually now focus students' attention on how many things they can compare and contrast in terms of those sub-activities, those arrows that I have drawn before, so that they can develop pretty good where do I have it? I'll just look for it. So in terms of these sub-activities, right, we want them to start seeing how many language items will actually be used in order to or what kinds of language items and in what ways they will be using them in order to actually um, communicate to the audience the mood they want to communicate and so on. Right, so it's all quite complex, and you need to actually produce a rich support so that you actually create conditions which you might call explicit teaching, but in fact explicit actually they result in students understanding what's involved. Okay, so we're there. Now we can move into exactly how I was actually teaching you to do it, and I will be actually not teaching you anything new. I will just rephrase again what we have covered so far in 7 or 8 weeks, 7 weeks, so that all this background information enables you to understand it better. We all remember this model, right? We've seen it now so many times we don't want to see it anymore, but it's very important. It is not just book student. What we want to do is to create a situation where students actually explore relationships, which means develop, are given access to rich contextual information which they explore in relation to different aspects of the task that they are actually engaging in, so that they can actually produce their own responses, so introduction or some other aspects of the text, whatever bits of the text that you will be supporting, mood, whatever it was there. So they explore. This provides a rich environment for them from which they can actually, which will support them in negotiating what will come in, and then they will send it to the external world. So we know that. Now, I have actually given you examples of models of units of work, how to actually go about creating one and doing so in a rich way. So for students, like for example, when I was teaching students in the very first lecture how to use a song, for example, I introduced the activity first, like a teacher could be introducing herself in the beginning of the class and actually saying to children that she loves songs. And she might show herself her own web page on the school's website. You click on her picture. I don't have it here. Say that's me. I don't know. I'm just making it up. And there are some songs here. You click on it, and then you can show to children your favorite song, and you can gently engage them in singing or sharing the experience of wanting to sing this particular song. So that's a kind of engagement, but they actually are seeing in their heads more than the song. They actually put it together that this song is not just sung by this teacher, it's actually on her website. So they kind of see that it's stored somewhere, that when she clicks, all these good things happen. So they can be singing the song with the teacher. And then what I did was to use the song as an excuse to learn literacy. So we sang, we clicked on different things, and we found how to spell it and so on. And then we were doing lots of reordering exercises. And then after that, we focused even on other games. I mean, we sang all day. We were playing with stuff on the smartboard and whatever. And then we might have actually gone to more, we expanded the activity and might have actually looked into word building exercises. So if children clicked on home, they got homework, homeland, and there's more stuff online, right? So what I did now, I started with the teacher introducing herself. Then I showed them the context in which the song was fitting, which is my own website, on the school's website. Then we went into playing with me, sharing with the new teacher a nice experience of singing together and playing with the song in more than one way. Playfully we moved into more exercises around this song, which created an exploratory context for us to find out what happens if you click here, what happens if you click there. Then I suggested you could actually by then use this enthusiasm to do some more structured exercises, and then you could actually engage children in creating their own entries on the school's website. Now, obviously, a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old is not gonna create a website the way, say, Apple would as a company, right? But that's not what we're after. We're after them starting to develop concepts that the stuff that the parents do at home, which is online this and online that, is not that inaccessible for them. They can have their own page, they can put their drawings of themselves there, and they can gently and surely start writing their name so that other children can actually recognize whose page it is, right? So the idea here is to have a communicative context, which is displaying your own page to your mates in class, right? That's a communicative context. And then everything else you do with children, any alphabet games and whatever you want, depending on the level of literacy of your students, that's what I call it. I called it class book. It could be class book, it can be a website. And now any activities you engage your students with are to serve to support students in the task of filling their own pages. You see, it's more interesting, and there is a goal there, and it's building on the fundamental need for people that we all have, and YouTube and Facebook have proven we want to share, right? So that was one activity. Let me have a look at another thing that I have created. Remember how we did poetry and music? We were comparing things like an anthem. And we were looking, what we found out in that activity that I was teaching online, we found out that before we even went to doing the lyrics and all of that stuff and creating poems, we've done a lot of work on trying to find out what about the genre of a particular song. So what goes into an anthem, what kind of moods is an anthem actually communicating. Then we looked at another genre, also, I mean, at the genre of an anthem as well, but it wasn't this kind of peaceful kind of way of sharing feelings. This one was a Chinese anthem, and it felt more like a call to action, right? So the mood was kind of more exciting, stirring people's feelings. It wasn't a mood of appreciation alone. So the idea of that activity that I have shown on the collaborative session was that before you even go into the poetry, since poetry is a way of actually harmonizing with one's soul, and one's soul always sings. It's a kind of mood and rhythm. Let's explore the rhythms and moods, and song is actually an easy way to access those feelings and those systems of organization. And then once children actually work very aware with moods and a rhythm, right, different rhythm for an anthem, like say we have in Australia different rhythm for an anthem like Call to Action, which is a Chinese kind of a rhythm. So once children have a grip of rhythm and mood, they can gradually start writing their own first lines. So we didn't ask children, get on with your writing, but we introduced poetry as a whole body and multiple modalities skill, right? So that was quite nice, and we've covered that. So you might go there. And there were some students who wrote to me about how to plan an activity like this, and I responded to them. So there. Then we also covered SAM, right? We did SAM. What did we do with SAM that was different? Well, the idea was to use spoken language first, again, just like with the song, and the same with the song of a sheep, and the same was with anthem and creating a poetry. So we again with the anthem we started with a song and with singing as opposed to writing poetry straight away. Here with Sam, what we started with was basically Sam engaging Max. Max was the learner, right? So Sam engaging Max in actually interacting with him. So I have presented you with an activity which had multiple levels, and in lecture 4 you will find summary of it, but it's online. Everything is on all of that is just I just copied that from online PowerPoint I've given to you. So what Sam did, Sam's activity is not just forcing people to talk, right? First, Sam talks about his own stuff, his own games, and then lets Max play with those games, and then invites Max in a gradual way to talk about how Max felt when Max was playing those games, right? So there was a gradual build-up, and with the spoken language we have gently introduced the genre of talking about what one does, and we did it by beginning with talking and by gently taking Max through activities that were putting words into Max's mouth. So whether Max wanted to talk about it or not, the words were there. So Max was never actually forced to invent stuff. Max was invited and given tools to work with. And there was place given for Max to talk about it his own way if Max was actually at a higher level of English. But you can see that this activity with Sam that I have posted, I think, in week 2 was an entire unit of work. Just running that would have taken you 6 weeks. So here there was some summary of it. Then another thing I have posted was literacy and English. Very often I see that units of work are organized, say, around some story, children's story, as shared reading and all of that. I don't have a problem with it, but then this particular, I don't have a problem with a story. What I have a problem is how pre-service teachers think they should work with a story. And usually it's not in a creative way, but as a comprehension sort of exercise. And then the concept of comprehension is completely misunderstood. So if we were to actually engage children by using a particular story in an exploration of aesthetic tools that that the story used in order for the story to be actually that highly valued as these stories that we use with children are, then you can create an entire unit which is about exploring the difference between well-created story like the one you are working with versus some other tools that wouldn't actually communicate those wonderful aesthetic feelings in the same way, right? So you actually use curriculum to actually look for, and not just curriculum, but any sort of databases of information to actually explore with children the aesthetics of a particular story by focusing, say, not on these different aspects, tools of expressing good things, bad things, mystery, rhyme, rhythm, emotions, humor, all of that. So just engaging children in creating their own story, but in an informed and supported way, and the support organized according to these categories, that would take 6 weeks or 5 weeks. I mean, that's a huge task for children, but they would have fun by clicking here and getting something stupid, clicking here, getting something amazing, right? Because if you say to them, click here, is it looking the same? And they would be laughing because there was something completely out of place, right? And you inserted it just for students to compare and see the difference. And they would just say, oh, that was funny, oh, that was hilarious, blah, blah, blah. No, I can see now, but this is a really better way, to talk about a particular person or talk about, express empathy or whatever, other emotions, right? So creating a unit that is to focus children on creating a story, but when they are unsupported, that's one thing. When they are supported with tools that focus them on language use in relation to these particular moods, it's a different activity, it's a different unit of work. Now, I know that some students were on database saying that this whole unit that I'm teaching is around primary school children. Well, this is obviously not the case, but I have assignments that talk about students, pre-service teachers working with 3-year-olds, and I have now people who are working at the higher end. So I have to cover for both. And I have in lecture 3 devised for you that actually this particular graph comes from lecture 3. So that could have been used at any level, can be used with Cinderella and can be used with Men from Snowy Rivers. I'm not very fluent in English text. I've given also, I'm hurrying a little bit because I don't want this lecture to be too long. I've given you also examples about how to work with different types of text when you actually want students to work in an informed way with texts that are used as historical documents. So I've given you in that lecture 3 as well. Other than this, you also had some support of how to create a unit of work for that purpose. So I have given you in assignment 1 that how it would look in this particular unit of work and how assignment 2 would look like. I had no problem with any of you using this idea and basically elaborating on it and creating your own unit of work on the basis of it, but I don't think anyone did. Another example, this was created by Natasha Hardy. Natasha Hardy was my student last year, and Natasha has created a community. She drew all these pictures, and that's a community. And now what I suggest you could do basically is create a unit of work which is quite well known as, in pedagogy of second language teaching, especially French culture of it, it's called macro simulation, where children actually explore a community. And the way I did that was put, you can't see it here, I put arrows next to each of the items you see here, and that took children to games where they were exploring things about garden, things about every person in the community, like a hobby of this person and a hobby of this person and this person and so on. And children, when they actually explore the community, you could actually run it as 2 units of work. The one focusing on exploring and talking about this community, and another one is by children assuming a role in the community and creating newsletters or blogs. Or you could create a unit of work, and I know that many of you are already committed to your own units of work, but this is just for future, just to give you an expansive perspective on what can be done. And creating a blog, community blog. And the community blog, when it can actually be an ongoing thing, which may last for the entire semester, where the first thing is to actually explore the community, and another one is each of the students is taking a role in the community. So, and they write in the community blog stories that are relevant to them in that life of that community. Other people will just write announcements. Other people will create ads. And other people will just in that community blog produce video clips. So you can see a lot of things can be done and can be supported in a smart way, and a lot of life can be put in those activities. Now, just to hurry through, because my recording will finish in a few minutes, I have given you links to some of the stuff I created in the past with some description. Now, if you look at them, and also links to some games here, which I found only today, you can create entire units of work on the basis or around an activity which is actually an online activity. So students, for example, might be shown an activity like this one. This is an online game which is very educational but also fun. And then you might actually ask them and support them also in it to actually create their own game for other children. So that would be fun. Now this one here, it actually engages children thinking about how to cook things, what ingredients are there and so on. But you can then break it down into support activities where children can actually produce, by being stimulated with this game, they can produce a menu for the family or a menu for some animals in a zoo as well. I mean, this is just for the family, but you know, they can actually think that they can cook things for the bear or they can cook things for a penguin and so on. So one activity can then actually be connected to other sub-activities and then connected to some more activities. All of this to support children in actually creating a menu for one day in their house. And you start with an online activity which is quite engaging and quite broad in scope, and then you actually break it down into different pieces that will support different aspects of students' cooking. So as you can see, plenty of ideas. A lot of them were given to you to begin with, but maybe it was not that easy to actually integrate them. I summarize this lecture with these 3 principles, and they were actually created by Professor Andrew Lian. He was a professor of ESL in Bond University, professor of languages in everywhere, wherever I can think of. Bond, James Cook University, University of Canberra, University of Rice University in Houston, some other university in America, currently in Thailand, retired, and still a professor and still teaching, still employed. And he produced these 3 A's, which is awareness, autonomy, and achievement, as guiding your teaching, and they're very supportive, very helpful. You can think about them. I might talk about them next time. I have to go because this film is gonna break any second. So thank you very much.